can, you know, the ultimate goal is to change the way humans collaborate and the way that we, the problems that we can solve with these new mechanisms. But when we really, the people we're talking to understand bonding curves, they understand economic mechanisms and so on, we can have some of our narrative, I think, going to the larger purpose, because that's what everyone is getting behind, token engineer or not. Right. But we do kind of need to set a certain baseline of these people understand these concepts, because otherwise we'll just get bogged down in explaining the most basic things. Yeah, so I think we keep.
So one of the ways that people
yeah. Go ahead, Steve.
One of the ways that we're accomplishing this is that we are creating baseline knowledge that we can refer back to repeatedly without having to re-explain things. So a lot of your earlier work that you've written and the stuff that I think is highest priority is stuff that we can sort of eventually relegate to reference material so that we can keep the topics high level without just falling into bullshit territory, because you can always say, and for more details or more definitions or blah, 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 go here, and those things are clearly defined, making a sort of an attention hierarchy, right? So that an audience member who wants to explore those questions can still go back and get those answers without us having to constantly, you know, throw the same information in everyone's face over and over again.
Yeah, and I think I've really seen some communities that do like the P2P Foundation, what's the other one, just jumped out of my mind. There's tons of this high level content that Daniel Christian Wall that I've been referring to. A lot of people are speaking about that kind of high level narrative about why this is really important. And we're basically coming in and providing them like the infrastructure and the tools by which those things can actually happen. Yeah. So we can utilize their content, and we want to do this. We want this to be a collaborative thing. We want to be talking to people who are working on these commons initiatives in the real world and saying, yes, this is the way that we should structure our society, and here are the tools by which we can do that. But we can use their content, we can push their content, we can share their content.
Yeah. And I think, while it's important to build sort of a repository of knowledge, or, knowledge base that people can easily reference, we should also, for our own sakes, to somewhat limit the scope of what we do. Here, also recognize that eventually there's going to be a website where we probably are going to have more streamlined, hit the nail on the head definitions of these terms and mechanisms and stuff. So let's look at it as a reference point for the next however many months. Not like it has to be perfect for all times, because there's a lot of other objectives that we have with these angles.
True. And I think that also helps to narrow down our main angle. And this is one of the things that we've talked about a number of times, that we kind of have angles on different layers. And I think, defining that, what is the first, and timeline wise, what is our angle? And I think we kind of come at this from multiple layers. So we are establishing token engineering. I think that's a huge message to this audience, and the tools thereof. So CADCAD open source. And as Griff said, we don't harp on this enough, to say we are providing tools and establishing token engineering. I think that's like our main angle for this audience. Right. What we're doing in a larger picture is creating new collaboration tools for communities local to the global, no matter how they can scale non-hierarchically, and they can cause change that is valued by this bonding curve. So we're creating new economic mechanisms for human collaboration. It's kind of like a higher level main angle. But I mean, so we kind of have multiple prongs with this. Yeah.
But there's the thing with that one is like, I think it's good to say that we have our audience and we have our main message that we want to convey, and then we're gonna afterwards split that up a little bit and okay, now we're doing the fundraising, and that is the message that we have for the fundraising things. This is the message that we have for this. But the main message is this.
Right.
That we're bringing this.
I mean, I suppose we don't have to do this right now, but we do have kind of multiple layers of audiences. And this is something that we've identified before. There's kind of the complex systems level, the people that that Zargam is speaking to in the complex systems language, they need to know that these are, you know, viable, viable systems approaches. This is like a, you know, we're designing biomedically, you know, we're using all of these very, very bleeding edge token engineering, even beyond token engineering. That's kind of the theoretical level, the abstract level.
Right, yeah. And that's what I want to, I want to establish the multiple main angles tonight. Because token engineering is definitely the immediate goal of it, but it's in support of these larger goals, right? To give people voice for grassroots actors to organize themselves for effective action, right. Which is ultimately in service of giving us the power to create the world that we want to live in.
Right. Do we think one of the angles, I feel like what sets us apart from, I mean, I guess that's kind of established in token engineering. What sets us apart from most projects because a lot of people are trying to solve the same problem. The problem is they're coming at it from a narrative approach. So they're saying, okay, how do we make decisions? We should do this. No, we should do this. Okay, let's just pick one of them and go. Whereas we're coming at it and saying, okay, how does a group make decisions? Let's formulate this in mathematics. Let's test it and iterate on it in CADCAD, and then put it. So we have much more rigorous definition of the problem, formalization in math.
We're doing the idea that the coordination problem is actually a joint estimation problem where across the community, there's unique knowledge, capability, information, and that the purpose of the coordinated decision-making is not just to make a decision, it is actually an estimator of the collective knowledge of this decentralized information. And we're doing this using mathematics from information systems, and cybernetics is probably the best historical term for what we're doing, but we are doing it formally in that tradition at the same time that we leverage the new technologies. Again, it's a narrative thing still to say, hey, we're using these methods and tools because we can't go into the full details of what it is to do this properly. But there is a historical arc of knowledge that we're building on that can be, clearly cited and referenced and learned from, so that it isn't just trial and error.
And I think it's also a great point that you just raised about the fact that it's the tools that you can use to kind of collect the sort of expertise of a bunch of different people who are knowledgeable about the problem, about how to go about solving it. Because the system isn't something that automatically surfaces the best solutions. You still have to plug the right people into the right knowledge holders, people who are close to the problem, and so to really. I don't know what I'm trying to think in terms of our main angle, but
we're not getting your audio very well. I'm not hearing it clearly, and that means the recording and the live stream aren't. I don't know if you want to try to step in front of the machine for speaking.
It's this one. No, I have a very directional mic, so this should pick it up from now on.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Well, yeah, I don't want to take too much time with this point, but just that, I appreciated the point that you raised about the fact that it allows us to kind of compile the sort of knowledge and estimation of a bunch of experts who have different but equally valuable relationships to the problem that they're working to solve. And, while it's maybe not our main angle, we're not building a problem-solving machine. It's about empowering people who are already, at least in terms of having some knowledge, are already partially empowered, like giving them the missing empowerment to make the change that they're.
Well, I think the language that matters in, the enable and empower are great words, but importantly, we are not substituting the technology for the information. The information in a decision-making process is still inherently human. The technology's job is to serve as a means of synthesizing it. None of the power or opinions or information actually comes from the algorithms. The algorithms are, this is the branch of estimation theory, where we're saying, given noisy, distributed, unaligned information, how do you estimate from it some other fact or some other decision? And that process view of input, noisy, messy, distributed, inconsistent information to a coherent, concrete outcome, that's a process operator. And so the algorithms are not deciding anything. They are merely applying a process with properties of synthesis.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. And I think it's great that, yeah, I mean, it's good to formulate this as, or to angle it as something that takes existing knowledge, existing potential, and then, yeah, organizes it into something actionable rather than just a bunch of chaos.
So I was looking at your roles taxonomy document, Zargam, that you sent me, and I found it really interesting that we define these kind of separate audiences or separate roles, even though it may be the same person. That person has, you know, a couple of different roles. You may be a speculator and project contributor, for example. You can take on multiple roles. So I do think it's useful to split out this audience, even if they may be the same in the beginning. So, I mean, the communities who need these tools are also the token engineers right now, you know, like the people who need these tools in this space are also the token engineers. But I think it's good to split this out into.
No, it's great. It's great.
Okay, I think our first.
Can I ask a moment to talk about the roles concept since you brought it up for everyone else? So just to be clear, Jeff is talking about the fact that when we describe a system, its sustainability or its holistic like ecology is dependent on the balance of the fulfillment of the roles, meaning that technically a degenerate solution would be that everyone always plays every role, meaning all roles are filled and the system is completely, you know, the ecosystem is solvent. But in practice, what we need is to say there must exist enough of every role to be in balance. Think of like species in an ecology, and that it doesn't actually matter from a systems health perspective whether or not that role is directly fulfilled by everyone plays every role, or whether the roles spread out. And in order to make the system healthy, each role needs to be worthwhile in its own right, and, you know, relative to the others. And if we get, you know, in general, we'll get mixtures, in a sense, populations of roles that are correlated, meaning maybe 90% of all role 1 are also role 2, but only 10% of role 3 is role 1. And so we have a view of the world that doesn't presuppose much about our users, besides that we have to have users of every type, and they self-select which roles they choose to participate in.
And then I would say that's probably a pretty accurate, you know, so of all the people we're looking to, we are the common stack. I think our first message should be, we are a tech stack for the commons. We are providing infrastructure and tools for communities to use to fund, make decisions, et cetera, transparent and secure escrow, analytics to feed back to good governance. This is our number one, because that's what we are. We are the common stack.
What is the saying? Tools and infrastructure?
Yeah, tools and infrastructure, yeah. Then I think, speaking to our second audience, which is probably, I mean, 100% of the people who will use the common stack are these communities. So that's our, you know, everyone is interested in that. Now, probably 75% of those are token engineers. So they're going to say, okay, well, what's the big benefit to using this? Well, here's our first plan with it, is we're going to launch the Token Engineering Commons. Now, we are establishing the discipline of token engineering by open sourcing CADCAD, by bringing this kind of iterative design process into life and producing a component library of rigorously designed, robustly tested, simulated, et cetera, that you can pick and choose off the shelf and create your own DAO commons with whatever governance mechanism you want, whatever funding mechanism you want, whatever escrow mechanism you want, and probably 100 other things once this component library starts to flesh out and, you know, we fill up the shelves. We're only talking about 4 basic components right now, but I mean, this is the beginning, the tip of the iceberg. So I think that's our second, you know, how we make that really valuable. Yes, we're providing tools and infrastructure for communities, and that can be a trash cleanup community, but more importantly for our audience, we can establish a token engineering community, and we can create funding for ourselves. We can bootstrap token engineering with the principles of token engineering that we're building, which is, I think, what makes this project so interesting. Now, our third level is what separates us from the rest, because a lot of people are trying to do this, but what separates us from the rest is the fact that we are bringing these token engineering disciplines in with the background of block science and complex systems engineering that has, all of this. Basically, we're designing things biomimetically. We're coming at this from like a component, like a viable systems approach. We're not building a platform because a platform might fail. If there's bad governance in Aragon, for example, the project may, suffer issues. I'm not singling out Aragon, obviously, great organization, but you have centralization in a platform. We are just producing components, and if one of those components doesn't work, you swap it out, which is like a vehicle, right? You build an airplane or you build a car. If your engine breaks, you can swap in a new engine. You don't have to go out and get a whole new car because it's a component-based build. So that's kind of the viable systems approach that we're coming at this from. So I think these are kind of the three layers, the three audiences, and the three like value propositions, the main angles for why those audiences are interested in the common stack. And then, of course, each of these has multiple breakdowns of content in terms of how we convey these things. That's a really good point. That token engineering article that I started writing back in February of this year, Zargan, I think should be our, and these two actually just went through and edited the past couple of days. Thank you very much. And I think this should be our, we are open sourcing CADCAD. Token engineering, A, is really important. B, this is how the common stack is helping to move that forward. And C, here is the super good tool that we want to open source and allow everyone.
Pause a second to talk about CADCAD open source with this group, because I know I know we're going to have probably a breakout session about it later. But so for me, there's a real bottleneck here in the sense that we've essentially said until we raise tranche 1, I'm not going to open source it, which is kind of backwards, right? Obviously, I want to open source it. I have other things now that are contingent on open sourcing it because I've got some academics starting to use it, and I just gave them trial license. But I have some others who are interested in linking me in with the existing open source Python ecosystems and fundraising associated with that. And I think there's a lot of synergy that will come once we get over that hump. And so one of the calm strategy action items actually needs to be, not just highlighting this, but also highlighting the fact that, there's a feed forward positive effect for getting the first tranche raised, because if we manage to get CADCAD open source, we can, open the gateway to, these other opportunities. But in some ways, this is a bootstrap, right? Like we need the funding to get it from something that was developed by, 3 people to something that has enough support to actually start to look at other grants and start a snowball effect. And I think there needs to be some narrative around, this isn't just a hey, one and done. It's actually that we've done, X years of work to get the CADCAD framework to where it is. It's ready to go from internally developed to openly used, expanded, community building, et cetera. And there's already starting to be other interests and other opportunities in the broader Python world, but we can't actually start that ball until it's open source. And it gets a little tricky because then people are like, well, why don't you just open source it? And the answer is that there's always this funding chicken and egg problem. At this point, I'm many hundreds of $1,000s in the hole in developing it, and I want to get it further to more people. And I don't, obviously the funding is the bottleneck for going from locally maintained for a small group of users to something that has, support and improvements and, et cetera, associated with a healthy open source project.
I mean, okay, let me ask you this, Zargan. Do you think we've already, CADCAD is in closed beta, lots of people have access to it, people are getting like Gem Fury key and everything. Do you think that anyone would say, if you continued forward with all of these opportunities for open source funding and grants and whatnot, do you think people would look at it and say, well, why are you raising money to open source CADCAD when it's already open source? I mean, we're basically—
That's not quite what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's not open source yet, in the sense that we've kept it in private beta, and everyone who's using it has a as a protected license that says, you know, it was given to you for free, but it's still a closed source software. I want it to be open source, but what I'm dealing with now is the financial aspect of the raise for the common stack, right? So we're pushed back some of our timelines, which means that, you know, we are essentially, an open source is a discrete event. We will essentially change the license, open the repos, and it will have a huge impact on the expectations of support in a real way, because suddenly, instead of it being closed source where, you know, we choose who to give it to, we choose who to help with it, there's a real need for that thing to have some, at least a basic support for anyone who wants to use it. And that opens up a door to other funding, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm trying to describe is a multi-stage process where process point 0 is it is closed source, it is controlled free access, and that the control is based on our attention and financial limitations. If we get the funding from the common stack, we can release that control point, because we can add a resource to be, like, you know, able to help maintain and build this open source community. And then furthermore, you know, build that community into something open and self-sustaining that's not, you know, bottlenecked on us per se, but that there's really 3 phases. There's pre-open source, post-open source, and post sort of what I'll call community maturation. And, you know, on and on from there. But I narratively am still struggling to explain to people, like, okay, well, it's not open source, but it's still kind of available. And like, what are the limitations and these chicken and egg problems? And I know Griff talked about, you know, making CADCAD a bigger deal in the value proposition, because, you know, essentially it gets delivered immediately upon fundraising, because we've already built the working version that we use today. We have some reference examples, some education material, documentation, etc. And I want to be able to make that leap as soon as possible. I'm just trying to figure out how to message it, because I don't want to give mixed messages. Like, you know, we need funds, but also we already have something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the community, and it's the fact that open source, good quality open source communities are work. That's the issue. The technical first deliverables are all done, but we do not have the bandwidth or the attention without funding to actually support the transition from basically we decide who gets to use it when, and we help them because we want to this is open for anyone who wants to use it, and there's enough support for them to use it.
Right. So a couple questions. A, do you need the funding provided by Tranche 1 to provide those resources for the open sourcing, like the developers that will need to be?
Yeah, I can't hire anybody. I mean, right now I'm basically month to month as an organization. So while we're not running out of money, we don't have anything. We can't spend on new resources without capital to draw from.
Cool. So that can be, I'd say, like our #1 priority for the next article to go out and really pumping up the value of that. Are you okay with the timeline, like the September-October timeline for the hard raise?
Yeah,
or
that's fine. I don't, we have hard limitations because of Griff's timelines, and I have a feeling that we're just going to have to make those timelines work. There's no point in like squabbling over them. It just means, you know, more treading in the meantime. In terms of articles, we have a possibility of going over some of the materials that Harry and others on my team have been de-clienting. Like, we've basically been taking client work and like extracting away from it anything that's client specific to show methods and tools. So there's going to be some follow-on opportunities for you and others in the narrative team to possibly, you know, take more of our content and continue to digest it away from specific projects towards specific capabilities. And I think demonstrating capabilities goes a long way to get excitement. Like, you know, showing things working, not just talking about them.
For sure, for sure. Cool. Okay, so we've got our audiences, we've got our angle. Now, I guess what we've started to do is drilling down into one of these. So I think our next thing on here is timeline of milestones of when to communicate what in the next weeks and months. And I think we just identified our first priority, that And perhaps this can be something that we can start in our kind of like soft fundraising zone that we're in now. We could be communicating this to the Simons, the Edens, the you know, whoever the larger donors we may be expecting, who are also in these close relationships. We can maybe say that this is a bit of a dependency. Yes, we're launching into our hard fundraise at TEG, but if we need funds prior to that, perhaps that's kind of, we can push on that in our soft fundraise and relationship building mode.
I mean, we can always funnel funds directly into that if, you know, eventually the CADCAD itself is going to have its own, like, you know, budget, in the sense that, you know, Block Science may be managing that as a thing that we do as part of our operations, the same way other organizations manage open source code bases. But in the long run, I would even imagine CADCAD itself coming under the domain of a traditional open source management in data science team. There are several. It's a point of exploration, but, you know, again, it goes back to phases, right? At the beginning, we're just trying to get it out and get users and get people to understand and learn how to use it, and to use it for systems where it's necessary. But eventually, it's not necessarily, you know, I mean, it doesn't need to be the common stack that is the owner, or at some level, it could end up being its own commons. If it grew to the point where CADCAD as a data science sort of package in the sort of numerical Python stack was, you know, at some point the licenses could be, you know, assigned to the open source licenses assigned to, and the funding profiles could all be actually a commons. It could be a CADCAD commons. I'm not saying it has to be that, but the point I'm trying to make is that eventually CADCAD is a standalone commons, whether it's managed traditionally or using our new infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so get back for a second, because this is CADCAD is a very specific work session that we can do.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about like common stack communication strategy, indeed, we talked about the main messages. You wanted to move already to the next point, but this is like this is what you wrote down. Normally, it's like what is the main message here? Because you went with 3 now, so I wrote them down. And the one, tools and infrastructure for communities. You put it number 1, so I guess you see that as the most important one, right?
And I think this is where we've already started. So if you read my introduction to the common stack, that's what we're talking about there. You know, so, and then when we, even in the component deep dives.
Number 3, that touches on that, talking about engineering economies rather than you know, coins.
Yeah. So, I would say so.
So in the order, you would say 1, 2, 3. Then for audiences to whom we link this, is communities who need the tools is like everyone, and that audience you could divide into crypto literate token engineers, and what is the next?
Like complex systems engineers. This is kind of like the jargon level. Kind of like complex systems engineering, where you're speaking in like stochastic exogenous processes. Like, if you understand that, you're in that level. But that's a very small number of people. That's like the Zargans, the Trents, the Shermans, the like high level token engineering, who are thinking on these abstract layers.
Actually, with that in mind, Jeff, I don't know if do you have a screen, or I can share if need be, but do you think it would make sense to pop open that sort of agenda that I sent you, the one with the research topics that's still pretty high level, although it's not one-to-one with your common map. It's actually probably like 60-70% overlapping with the kinds of topics that we're going to have to hit. And these
research roadmap,
magnification from academics, where my ideal setting is that Common Stack isn't producing these, but rather academics are. But then we, in turn, want to be citing these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're talking about your research roadmap?
Yeah, the research roadmap doc.
So this is definitely, this is exactly what we need for this third level, is basically Zargam's research roadmap. So I mean, generalized differential equations for data science. So I mean, a lot of this, kind of needs like that translation to how this is useful for audience 2 and audience 1. Because most of them would hear, you know, we need to create a generalized differential equation for data science, you know, or generalized differential equations for business logic, and be like, what are you talking about? But that's this audience level, and that's the academics, that's the policymakers, and that's going to be Z's hood. That's where he like runs in his circles, and he's talking that language to those people, and they're going, okay, these guys know what they're talking about, and we're going to give them, you know, some range to it, whether that's funding, whatever.
From our comms perspective, we need to basically build the relationships with these people, and we need to be prepared to cite these things, even if these things are research in progress. We can literally say things like, based on the research of persons X, Y, and Z at institutions A, B, and C in, you know, forthcoming papers, and, you know, later change them to citations, etc. But a lot of that is important for differentiation, because otherwise our stories about rigor are like empty. They're not actually empty, but we want them to resonate, and we want people to be able to, you know, follow links to people, even later to follow links to articles, and be able to say, oh wow, yeah, these are the people that I would want figuring this out.
It's important for the credibility that we need to build up. Yeah.
And I think that's the drill down. So I think we start at this layer. You know, we tell people why this technology is important, and then we say, okay, how are we going to do it? By doing it with proper token engineering and establishing token engineering. And if people really start to drill into that, then they can get this kind of information. Okay, we're creating generalized differential equations for And if they get to that level and they want to dip their toes, it's there. But it's a drill down from, here is our first message, this is what's behind it, and this is what's underneath that.
Yeah.
Attention funnel.
Can you say that again?
I said you've got an attention funnel, and like that's what you're mapping out right now, is like an attention funnel where people can guide themselves down that attention funnel. We're not making them go to the deep content. They're choosing it if they want it.
Right.
And
I've seen articles where they literally, sorry, Chris, where they literally include a disclaimer that's like, by the way, you might want to stop here. There may be articles where we want to consider doing that. Maybe.
yeah, we've already done like putting stuff in footnotes. It's like, this is stuff you really want to drill down. But so like that one, because this is the basics for everything, so it's important to challenge it a little bit. I'm wondering here if I agree with the number one is we're building tools and infrastructure for crypto literate communities in the future for everyone. But then like the levels, I was thinking, to me, possibly higher level coordination mechanism for the economy. To me, that's more the second level. And the 3 is that the token engineering is everything that's behind it. So I would possibly reverse those 2. Because the especially the like mechanisms for the economy, it's like we're for a big chunk. Yeah, and it's like we're gonna do fundraising. So right now, those people are going to be interested in these economic mechanisms.
I agree. Maybe this is the wrong thing to have here. I do want to keep token engineering as layer 2 because that's what these people will really want. I think that's the.
I think we don't have to like 1, 2, 3 angles in an audience necessarily correlate to each other. Though I feel like those could be like free floating.
Yeah, I agree with that because this is, and so just to give an idea,
because I think this is great. The thing you just crossed out, I don't think
I wouldn't cross it out at all. It's something that is extremely important for many people.
I just don't know that like you said, like does that go with 3 or does that?
I think this. If you want to understand more about this, you go to this. If you want to understand more about this, you go to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's more a level of like, how do you pass on the message? You start with the thing by saying we're building tools and infrastructure for communities, and we're doing this.
We're engineering economies.
And how are we doing this? Okay. Because we're establishing token economies. And then when it comes to like, I was just like absorbing and listening when it comes to who are we talking to. Now the 1, 2, 3, indeed, it doesn't need to completely correlate. What I've now put down, again, just a proposal, is our main audience. We have one main audience, and that is crypto literate communities who need DGOF tools. That's the 100% you put over there. That's just like just about everyone. But like under this level, under the general communities who need the tools, they're all right now it's crypto literate community.
Yeah.
That's our audience that we're targeting.
Yeah.
And like the part of it is going to be like token engineers, and a part of them are going to be academics.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is actually, so the one goes a little bit away. For me, it's like a 1 and an A and a B maybe under.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And we as long as we start with this is because that's our brand. We are the commons stack. We are a tech stack for the commons. And I've started a doc where I've started basically putting out like blurbs, like so we can really narrow in on what is our project. And it's difficult because there are multiple facets as we've seen. So we are establishing token engineering. We are building.
I think one of the important aspects of this to avoid the confusion about being too spread out in topics is that our focus is on synthesis of capabilities. While we are working on new capabilities, in general, if you think about things in terms of technical capability silos and whole systems, and a lot of our narrative is around complexity and system science, what we're basically saying is that there's a bunch of verticals of technological advancement, and then there's a separate notion of the parts becoming a cogent whole, and that Common Stack, unlike other projects, is less focused on innovating on any of the particular silos and more focused on the science of synthesis into a whole, and that we will build on and work with and integrate with anyone and anything that's a good part, but that, you know, this is a, you know, I use the term gestalt, like we are focusing as a, on holism, on completeness, on ecosystems. And what we're saying is that there's a different technological problem associated with ecologies and with understanding coordination that doesn't live in the parts, but rather in how the parts interact with each other. And so we need to continue to differentiate ourselves as saying, yes, all of these things are awesome. We're replacing none of them. We are simply focusing on the lateral, that which binds them into a viable whole, rather than the individual capabilities of the technologies. And like that, it puts us in a pivot space, which says we aren't trying to be the experts over every bit of everything. We are inviting those experts to be part of us, but our manifesto is about holism.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that also in that sense, like how the overall document is built up, the fact that we have our puzzle pieces, I think that helps also to say we're building this whole, and at some point we're gonna have like an intermediary whole first commons that like has these pieces, but these pieces, to build those pieces, we're inviting many people to help us build it.
And it's inherently modular design so that the whole itself can evolve with the new creations of others. So the continued involvement of others and the advancements of other technologies are not actually competing, they're actually enhancing the common stack. Everyone from Aragon to DAO Stack to whomever who makes a meaningful advancement like is something that we view ourselves as being able to integrate into our thinking, because we are focused on the whole and that which is possible through these technologies for people, rather than the individual new components themselves. And the places where we're adding components are inherently systemic. So both bonding curves and conviction voting are representations of resource allocation problems at the horizontal, as opposed to protocols at the, like, you know, what I would call the hardware level of a system, or at the infrastructural level. You take the infrastructure that you have, which creates resources, but you do a different type of problem solving to jointly allocate those resources for common good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we've got some good stuff here. I was going to say another angle, since we're kind of building out, I think we're drilling into each of these levels and figuring out what needs to be communicated.
Great, because this is like sub arguments, and like why is this our main message? The things that you just said, this argument, they're all like, why is this? Why are you claiming this? How can you support your message? And this is great stuff for that reason.
I think we need to do a high-level explainer article for each component.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've got CD. I'd say that's the one that I just put out. Is with
almost already, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a high level. Now we also need to do, I'd say, a deep dive, and maybe that's more like level layer 2. I mean, it doesn't, who cares really where it fits in. Like the augmented bonding curve deep dive that Abby put out, that's the perfect example of that, getting into the parameters, getting into how it actually works as opposed to what it's doing. So, I mean, I have a bonding curve article explainer in the works for the ABC, and I've got a conviction voting article deep dive in the works. And I think those should be, priority is the question.
So every time you want to do for the components like an explainer and a deep dive.
Yes.
And so, for example, the one that Abby has done for conviction voting, you would create another one. Oh no, that one you see as like done. Okay.
Yeah, she did the bonding curve deep dive, but now we need to follow up like that high level explainer of conviction voting is like, how is this useful to people? And then this is how it's modeled in CADCAD. These are our assumptions. These are our parameters. This is the code. This is the, you know, for the devs who are like, that's cool, but how does it work?
Yeah.
Here is our deep dive.
And these are then links to an even deeper layer, and that's like CADCAD work and like the research that behind it to make like those things.
Right. Yeah. So we almost have like a 2-layer. One is more for like the general audience. This is why continuous voting might be something to explore. These are the things about the bonding curve that are really neat. It's designed biomimetically. We're using token physics to take a friction and feed it in as an input. You know, that's something. I mean, it's in Abby's article, but it's not explained in English. It's explained in parameters of CADCAD. You know? Right. So like, yes, it's there in the diagrams, but do people look at that and go, oh, they're taking a friction and they're feeding it back in as an input to create an efficient economy? That's not the first thing that comes into their head, right? So we need to explain that again in English, not in diagrams and parameters.
Yeah.
So I feel like we need, for each of our components, these 2 layers, the high level explaining what does this do, and then the deep dive, how does this do it? Right. If you want to get involved, this is where like the magic is happening.
Right, for sure. But you're talking about leaving it for bonding curves because Abby already did that, or you want to do our own version of it?
Bonding curve deep dive is done.
Okay, cool.
The conviction voting high level is done.
Right.
We also, I mean, the Giveth data is going to be much shorter. You know, we don't have to go into a whole new governance mechanism. We're just saying, hey, this is how the Giveth data works. It's going to provide secure, transparent escrow, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to refactor it by doing this.
And is the deep dive called for on there? I would think maybe not.
Maybe at some point at the moment it's going to become clearer to us what it's actually going to be and how it's going to work.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So if it emerges, then we can write it. But we don't have to.
We're not there yet.
Yeah, for sure.
And I guess it's the same thing actually for the augmented bonding curve. You might feel the need at some point to write a deep dive that is in the tone of the other deep dives that you're doing.
And it's specific to certain projects that we're doing.
Yeah. So in terms of priorities, these are all awesome. And I mean, they are a priority to get them out, but I think we have more pressing priorities in terms of what we need sooner than later. So like we need to explain to people how we work so that we can get contributions from them. So I think like our iteration strategy is really important to communicate how we're going to launch this project because it's a big complicated beast. So I mean, even before iteration strategy is, you know, are conveying exactly what the common stack is. And that's these documents that I've been working on. It's like the overview, the fundraise, the iteration strategy. This is kind of like, in a nutshell, the summary of the summary of the summary of the project. This is what you can read, where you can get an overview of everything that's going on, and then you can drill down where you need to go. So I think that is our first comms deliverable, is this like common stack overview docs and explaining our fundraise, because this is our #1 priority, and that ties into, you know, our CADCAD priority as well, and also the iteration strategy. And I think this is what we need to communicate first and foremost. I think we have enough excitement around the project. I mean, everyone wants to know more about this for sure, but we need to secure our funding before we can ensure that all of this is going to happen. So I think our priority is, you know, explaining the overview of the project, how the fundraise is going to work, how the iteration is going to work, and where we do that. So I mean, right now they're in Google Docs. Do we put that out in a blog? Is that something we want to make public, or maybe even not just yet? Like definitely a question.
I think we have to coordinate with the people upstairs right now about that.
I think, yeah, sorry.
No, and I was gonna say, but it seems like there's definitely a lot of urgency behind this CADCAD article as well, or am I, not just in terms of, yeah, I mean, but I feel like these 1, 2, 3 main angles could all fit very organically within a document where we're also introducing our plans to open source it in the medium near future.
Yeah, that's in it, and indeed, I think CADCAD is a little bit of, if we think about common stack strategy, it's a little bit of a sidetrack. Of course, it's important.
Well, in terms of putting an overview out there, I mean, it's not an overview of our immediate roadmap, but to the degree that, like, I mean, I feel like there's stuff written about us, but it's somewhat fragmented. I think the CADCAD article, in addition to being something that we should be working on pretty soon, is an opportunity to put our 3 main angles into a single piece. Should we choose to use it that way?
In the CADCAD article, you think?
I mean, I know it's sort of like,
Can I?
yeah.
So I think what we're teasing at here is that, Common Stack is a thing and CADCAD is a thing. We have Common Stack articles. There actually are CADCAD articles about CADCAD. What we're missing is articles not about either, but about the relationship between the two. So think of it like a graph. We have definitions and we're building Common Stack stuff. And I don't know if you guys have seen them, but Jeff has shared the articles that my team wrote, which are sort of business level, motivational, and then there's also some tutorials, but there's content on CADCAD directly that I've already had my team produce. Yeah. And what's missing is more a bridge where we say, here is how CADCAD relates to Common Stack. And it is a little bit ancillary in the sense that it's a linkage, but it's also important to note that Common Stack as a whole is an enabling technology, which means we're saying, look, here's a common valuable resource that's been produced, and there are governance and funding challenges associated with it. Therefore, it makes sense as something for us to champion, in particular because we are users of these tools. And so something along the lines of less about CADCAD and less about Common Stack and more like an article that says, here's how and why these two things are related.
Yeah, and I think that token engineering article that I started would be a good spot to kind of bring those together around the theme of like why token engineering is important.
Yeah, and I defer very much to you guys in terms of how to accomplish that, because for me, one of the hardest parts is that some things are inherently obvious that are very non-obvious to others, and I sometimes struggle to find the right way to articulate things that, for people who don't have the same base knowledge to build on.
Yeah.
So I think indeed, like the way you guys just said it, if you have a basis for that article, in a way, that is an article that is to me that's a bit of a one-off. But that is very important in our overall output of articles that we'll have, because it's going to reinforce why we're doing this. And it's like,
and especially what we put out ahead of September.
Yeah. So, and it's going to content because it keeps the content flowing. It's like, oh, that's why they keep on referring to CADCAD. And what is the link with Common Stack? So it's super important content.
Having it all in one place.
So that for sure. So
do you think that article we've been working on could be
the token engineering
a little and turned into this?
I think so. Well, we may have to cut some of the content because I really want to, if that should be our main angle then. Right. Token engineering is important, but the Common Stack is open sourcing CADCAD to enable token engineering to, but I think that's the right angle to launch that in, and also guys basically building the case for token engineering, which kind of, builds out this, we've got token engineering, we're defining token physics, we've got, this layer of support. We're not just saying, hey, we're token engineers and we're going to start doing stuff. No, we're defining things mathematically. We're developing a token physics of this system using economic conservation principles, which allows rigorous token engineering to exist on that math, which is how real engineering works. It works on real world math. So this is what really separates the Common Stack and what is the research coming out of block science from most other people.
I'd also expand the discussion of our narrative in terms of, not just this fundraise stuff, but broadly to everything we're trying to accomplish. One thing you can say is that we are decentralizing the engineering process. So going back to the discussion of architecture and buildings from our group sessions. You know how I was talking about requirements gathering and understanding the needs of the communities, and then the architecture firm, which is essentially the token engineering design, followed by development, followed by full life cycle, like whether it's contracting the individual sub-teams, whether it's maintaining the systems after they're deployed. What we've actually done is taking the ontology of the constructive, the engineering process, all the way from needs capturing to development to deployment to maintenance to full life cycle. And we're saying, hey, actually, this is a pretty well-defined process. And we are actually using our knowledge and our skills to make it a more decentralized process where we're bidding out subcontractors, we're bidding out end commons, where we're doing the whole process of an engineering life cycle that Griff talks about with power plants. But instead of it being by a centralized state building a power plant, we're actually saying that a community can actually use this process of discovering their own needs, designing a thing, testing a thing, building a thing, maintaining a thing according to best practices in engineering, automation, and operations, but actually without having to be a state or a big power company or whatever. And I actually think that the fact that we have this basis of knowledge and the ability to replicate the ontological aspects of full life cycle systems, again, back to the systems engineering and operations concepts, we aren't limiting ourselves to the discussion of wet governance at the fuzzy level and sort of overly optimized micro level protocols, but actually filling the whole cycle out and still asking how best to do that in an open community centric way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I wrote that down in one sentence of what you were saying, because it's like, indeed, it needs to come out of it. Like, if you're right, that's the message that you want to convey, what Zardan just said. So that makes sense. But I guess it's in there in a way.
Cool. Well, we have 1 minute left, and I think we've covered all of the. No. Okay, one more. What do we got?
Well, I think one thing that's important that you put it on there and you kind of took it off, but because to me we were now talking about like an article that you started already that Adam has seen and that is making this link. But if we think about like priority of articles that we need to get out, and you say you have to check maybe with Griff, maybe you do, but at the other hand, it's like we have this overview now of how it all like fits together, right? The iterations that are coming, the fundraising elements, and so on. I think it would actually be of huge value to summarize the 3 docs in one post that doesn't drill down into the deepest detail, but that says like, we're starting the fundraising, these are the iterations, and it explains the connections between the different documents, etc. And if they keep on reading, then it means that we have them, and we could possibly end with a call to action that links to, definitely to the forum, but maybe even to our explainers.
I agree, but I don't think the deliverable should be an article first. I think it should be the presentation first, because we need to get this presentation to Max ASAP so he can start getting his graphic design team on it. And then that presentation can serve as the basis for an article when we have the cycles for that. But I think this presentation needs to happen first, because we need to get it to a graphic design team who is going to hopefully work with all of these graphics, which a huge holdup in comms right now, actually I might as well identify this, is graphic design and like graphic iteration, even more than graphic design. I kind of put all my ideas out and then they're not quite right, but I don't know how to make them better. And we need to work on this like graphic iteration strategy so that we can get it into a professional looking format for like 4 weeks from now.
Okay, so we have 4 weeks, and so my challenging you there a little bit is I was thinking you made now this huge interconnected web of documents, which is fantastic, and it has it all. Drilling it down from that to a presentation, if you drill it down first to a Medium post that summarizes everything still in text, and then going to even more concise in the presentation, might work better.
If it was me, I'd feel more comfortable doing it. I think everyone has their own approach, but if it was me, presenting stuff helps me distill it. So even though you want the presentation to be perfect, you can't help that it's going to get better and better every time you do it. So to me, it's like the Medium article is the presentation to the whole world, not just people who are in the room. So like
and my point is not to put out the Medium article now, and I know the presentation is going to go out first, but my point is just like it might be a means of getting already saying that this is like all our article, all of our posts, our text in one document, and now we need to like get it onto 2 pages. Okay, now we have it on 2 pages. Now these 2 pages we can get it into presentation.
I would argue the exact opposite actually, because point form for me is where we need to, and I mean, I need to do this with all my articles and I need to be better at it. You know, they're 12-minute reads for a reason, because I need to point form, and then just like, I think we need to start with the bones, which is the presentation, and then flesh out the bones, which is the article. Right now we have all the detail in these docs, which is great, but it's overwhelming.
Right.
So now we need to figure out what are the key messages.
Yeah.
The key messages go into the presentation, and actually this is how I wrote that first article that got me here anyway. I had a presentation, it had key points, and then I put that into an article and I said, okay, key point, explanation, key point, explanation, key point, explanation, and there's the article.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would love to do the Medium article. If the time wasn't an issue, I would be all over doing that. But I really want to get this presentation to Max, because I may be going to see him like in a week and a half, and he needs, I think, 2 weeks to like get it ready for before I'm there. So there's really some time crunch on the presentation.
Yeah.
So that and graphic iteration to convey these concepts, because words is one thing. And I found like being able to just draw or graph or table, and I mean, it's coming in all these docs, it's really like evolving, but I would like some more eyes on like, what is the best way to explain this with a picture?
And let's also stay attuned to the possibility of non-graph, non-chart visual aids.
Yes.
Because I think, yeah, those are easy to overlook. It's like, we don't want to sit down and draw a flow chart, but like, that's not necessarily for all of our readers going to be the thing that makes it click for them.
Zargham is really good at communicating this visually. However, he's communicating to this audience, you know, the people that are going to look at this.
I'm literally drawing something to share with you guys in a few minutes, that I'll share with you in a few minutes, since just so that you guys know, we had another block for comms. I'm good until about 3:30, but then I have to leave. So just as a timeline heads up, but I'm listening, and I'm actually, I need like 5-10 minutes to just demo and discuss something with you guys regarding communications of the fundraise, which builds off our discussion from earlier. But I need at least 5 minutes before we do that.
Sure. We have a second block right now. For
They're back-to-back comms blocks. I was gonna say though, like maybe now we do try to transition into like focusing on either that presentation or a specific article, so that because we were supposed to do one comms strategy and then one comms concrete.
So what I'm looking for is 10 minutes to talk specifically about the tactics about communicating the raise, and in fact the discussion that we had earlier about the complexity of the sort of caps, timeframes, etc. I've already almost finished making a mock-up that will allow us to demo how that would work, because my feeling is actually quite strong that we need to have a logical construction that accounts for timeframes and caps, but I can make it very, very intuitive. And like I said, in 5 minutes, if you give me 10 minutes, I will show you what I want to show you, and then ask you guys for feedback on how best to proceed with communicating that so that it is simple enough for our audience, but achieves our goals as a project.
So let's do that. Let's break for those 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Do that, and then after those 10, hit one of these things that we have.
I'd like to synthesize this into some notes. I know you've been taking them. I just want to make sure the understanding that I have is also captured in those. So maybe I'll take
You can check
minutes.
I think I put down, well, literally what's on the board, but you can have to check if it's there or not.